Today I'm going to be talking to you about a topic that I've become increasingly interested in but worried about over the past few years: subscription models. Subscription models on paper are just an operating model for businesses, and not even a new one at that, but in reality they're quietly transforming our relationship with the world around us and completely upending our lives in the process. We're currently in a transition period between a time where most things we pay for were ours to own and do as we see fit with, to a future where we don't own anything at all. Instead, we pay for subscriptions for everything in our lives, from the clothes we wear to the electronics we use. The only things we come close to owning are things like food that cease to exist when we use them, and even those are subscribed to. Companies operating using this model generally promise convenience, choice, and reduced stress. Many also make the case for less waste and a better environmental impact. But there are huge negatives. Subscriptions give us no security if we lose our jobs. They pose a myriad of threats to small businesses, and they put incredible political, social, and economic power into the hands of the companies that provide them. This all started with what is often called software as a service, but the Free Software Foundation calls service as a software substitute. SaaS has been incredibly successful for the companies that use this model, and has inspired a host of offshoots in the technology space, including platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. As consumers became more connected and e-commerce became more sophisticated, the SaaS model began to inspire other more consumer-focused industries. These three companies have quite different markets and operating approaches, but they have all played a part in normalising the idea that paying a regular fee to receive products that traditionally you would have bought individually as and when you wanted them. Since then, we've seen an absolute explosion in the products consumers can access on subscription, and from my own experience as a tech journalist, it now seems to be the most common model for new product launches. However, while these industries generally cater to luxuries, what we are beginning to see now is far greater growth in more essential parts of our lives. And this is the end game: life as a service, where you pay a subscription fee for everything you need to live, from rent to clothes to transport to education to food to healthcare. For younger people who are increasingly facing the prospect of never being able to purchase a property, this is becoming increasingly possible, particularly as we're seeing the emergence of the new co-living model, where you rent a service studio flat from a company with extra services bundled in. Businesses are also increasingly shifting away from owning assets to paying regular fees to use them. Many businesses are now operating through co-working spaces such as WeWork, which are essentially service offices with bells on, while company cars are being replaced by lease or ride-sharing services, and equipment is increasingly being moved to the cloud. Even computers and other hardware is increasingly being accessed via a rental service, enabling it to be more easily upgraded and removing large one-off expenditures, which can often look bad on financial reports from a company's books. It's also worth noting that many companies, including those that provide subscription services to consumers, are paying for subscriptions to companies that are also using subscriptions. And it's worth mentioning this because it makes those companies very reliant on others below them in the stack. However, companies aren't, at least for the most part, trying to orchestrate a life as a service scenario. They're embracing this model right now because it makes a huge amount of sense from a business perspective. This model offers lower barriers to entry and so makes it easier to attract customers. It allows them to build predictable linear revenue that makes it easier to manage supply and demand, helps build long-term relationships with customers, and provides data and insights about customers that can help improve their business. However, most of all, businesses that use this model are growing at a far faster rate than market averages. This model works financially. It's important to note that this is not a model that is being forced on consumers. Many of them like it for many reasons. According to a survey by Turo, in the UK, 18% of consumers now actually prefer subscriptions to owning products, which rises to 25% for those living in our capital in London. This number is also high for people under 35, suggesting these models will become more popular as millennials and members of Generation Z get older. Subscriptions can also be a force for good, particularly when it comes to sustainability. For example, many of the companies in the clothing for hire space are gaining customers because the model is being seen as an antidote to fast fashion, which is a major contributor to global carbon emissions. And in many industries, this model is being positioned as a means to combat waste. For others, subscriptions are lowering the barrier of access, such as in education. College textbooks run into the hundreds of dollars to buy and are only used for a short period of time, which is why subscription textbooks are already being provided and are proving to be a very popular idea. Despite the positives, there are also deeply concerning aspects of the subscription model, and right now these are not only not really being addressed, but they're very really being acknowledged or talked about, because the subscription market is currently made up of so many small players, none of which really have enough reach to be either fully responsible or capable of tackling the negative outcomes. First of all, there's the issue of cost. In the vast majority of cases, they are more expensive than buying a product outright. Say, for example, that I decide to get a new laptop, and instead of buying one, I opt to rent one through a subscription company. While I don't have to pay for an upfront cost for that laptop, the amount I pay each month over the course of the time I use it is likely to be significantly higher than if I just paid for it outright. And at the end of that time, I still don't own that laptop. Sure, I get some benefits. If a new model comes up that I want, I can just exchange it rather than saving up, but it is still costing me far more for the same basic item. That's just one thing, but if you amplify that across all the different goods and services that I might access through a subscription model, I'm ultimately paying far more for no material gain. Add the fact that where I live in London, the average person spends 49% of their salary on rent, and you have a situation where there is very little money left over for savings, meaning in this scenario I am perpetually locked into a subscription lifestyle. I don't have the money to get out of it, and I can't afford the possessions that would allow me to make the jump away from subscriptions. There's also the matter of a lack of security. What happens if a person becomes unwell or they lose their job? Subscriptions offer no security in that situation. They would simply stop receiving the services and products they relied on. And in severe cases, that could mean a very short road to poverty. In some cases, new developments are simply coming from new companies with novel approaches to existing industries. And one of the most notable in this space is the emerging labour as a service market. This is essentially a step on from the 0 hours contracts that many companies are now using, where a company accesses ad hoc employees through a subscription. It's very small at the moment, but it is projected to grow significantly over the next few years. And while it promises convenience for companies, it poses very serious concerns about the financial security of those being employed through it. This total lack of security also reflects on companies. If a business has a cash flow issue and can't pay their bills, the services they use will be cut off. And if you're a business that relies entirely on subscriptions for infrastructure, that prevents you from doing the work that actually enables you to make more money and pay those bills. In that scenario, you could very quickly find yourself without a functioning business. This phenomenon also hands an incredible amount of power to big companies behind these subscriptions. They can ultimately decide the success or failure of a product or brand by whether they decide to include it on their platform, giving them huge reach over entire industries. A part of this power is, of course, data collection. Consumers have no option of privacy under these models. If they want the products and services offered through these subscriptions, they have to agree to data collection. And what companies do with this data is entirely up to them. Consumers have no say in how it is handled or who it is sold to. We've already seen how social media can be used to manipulate political opinion on a shockingly granular level. But what if a company is in charge of providing all of the media, entertainment, services and possessions in millions of people's lives? The amount of political and ideological influence that provides is incredible. And in the wrong hands, this could be misused to push certain political and ideological mindsets, particularly without consumers really seeing it happen or being aware of it in any way. Of course, we don't actually live in a science fiction novel. For many, subscriptions will likely remain fragmented and augmented by possessions, while others would likely embrace subscriptions as their primary possessions, but choose to use a host of different companies and sources. But this could still be a serious reality for many, particularly those who are less well off. True ownership as we know it historically is increasingly becoming the domain of the wealthy, with the inequality widening that looks set to become increasingly true over the next few decades. I think Edward Snowden summarised this very effectively back in November at Web Summit when he said,
"My generation, particularly the generation after me, they no longer own anything. They are increasingly not allowed to own anything."
However, John Phillips, who is the general manager at Turo, which is a cloud-based subscription management platform, characterises the phenomenon differently. "We are entering the era of usership over ownership," he said. "The shift to subscriptions is inevitable." All of this being the case, life as a service is really not a future that I want to see come to fruition. While I don't think that free software alone is going to stop this, I do think that the free software movement has a role to play, particularly given its long-standing resistance to the SaaS model. There is also a need for more discussion about the downsides of subscriptions. It rarely gets attention apart from when some specific misdeeds of particular companies are being discussed. While there is nothing inherently wrong with buying a product on a subscription, where it becomes a true threat is when it stops other models from being viable alternatives. When people are forced to enter subscriptions to access goods they need to participate in society, we will truly be in the age of post-ownership, and all of the privacy and security implications that come with it.